Well, we're in October. This is Black History Month.
My God.
We are the School of Education.
We
And
are.
we are the educators of the world, not just Hertfordshire.
That is like the best opening ever. I love it. I feel so kind of warm now because October is a cold month,
Yeah.
but you're absolutely right. We often, as educators, underplay our job. And we often sometimes forget what it's all about. And with it being Black History Month, I think this is a really good time to reflect about what we do as educators. And in my case, being a young white bloke who teaches in a really multicultural school in a university which is incredibly diverse. And I spend a lot of my time thinking about what's my job and how do I improve my work, and how do we help people learn about what education can do. I think that's one of the great things that we do in the school.
No, I agree. I mean, we've been thinking about the fact that as a university and as a school, are we representative? How can we be more representative? And not just within our staff teams and our students, but there's a lot of conversation about decolonization and how difficult that is. And, is it right? Is it fair? Do we lose the quality of our sources by doing things just because?
Yeah.
And sometimes I think we can overthink things, considering the fact that we are educators, teachers. Representation comes in all angles,
totally.
In the classroom, in our resources, in our conversation, and we've asked some of our students to do some book reviews about some of the resources they're using in classrooms and things like that. And I know that you've been looking at a lot of your resources within your lectures, within your personal reading. And it's not just written material, but even the arts.
Yeah,
Tell me
definitely.
a bit about what you've been looking at over this month.
Yeah, so what I've been doing, this is kind of like led to a couple of months. So of course we're in a COVID world at the moment, and over the summer I moved a master's module completely online, and that module is about social justice. And as one of the readings on that, they talk about what it means to be a knower. How do we come to know stuff? And there's a structure of the way we describe whether somebody knows stuff, and it's S knows that P, so the subject knows that proposition. And this is used a lot in philosophy. So Lewis knows this, or Lewis knows that, for example. That's all that means. But this philosopher says that doesn't work, because I might know from my perspective what the world looks like and feels like. But if I'm not somebody who looks different, who comes from a different cultural background, who comes from a very different life, they won't know my world, they won't know what I know and how I've come to know it, and I won't know what they know and how they come to know it. And so I've been using lots of different resources in my teaching to highlight that the closest we can do is be empathetic. That's the closest that we can get. We will never, as people from different historical backgrounds, different cultural backgrounds, know each other's lives intimately like we might our family. But what we can do is be empathetic about what we know and how we come to know it. And so what I've been doing is using different books. So I had a whole module which was structured around Akala's natives.
Right, yeah, lovely.
And what's really important about that, and you're talking about decolonizing before, is that we still have to use those sources, critically. It's like, it's really easy to go, I think, oh, here's this book by Akala. Isn't it amazing? Isn't it wonderful? Isn't it, this beautiful text, which a lot of it is, but it's still not without its point of criticism, its point of necessary critical engagement to go, what can we learn?
What are we learning from this? Yeah.
What are we learning? And it might be how not to do something, or how not to talk about this or that story. For example, I'm not saying in that work it is, but there is a lot of really good stuff, but there's also lots of contentious stuff.
Yes.
But something else that I do is I do something called object study.
Mm-hmm.
So we might do this in drama. Now I know that you have a drama background, but we might use something in drama and philosophy where we put an object in the classroom and we get students to think about the journey that object's been on, or the story that that object tells us about, and we create it and we try to think about that. But one other thing that I do is use works of art.
Okay.
And I've used 2 works of art recently in my own learning about my own pedagogy and practice. And one is by Chris Feely, which is called No Woman, No Cry, which is this beautiful image, this sad image of Doreen Lawrence, Stephen Lawrence's mother. And it's an image which is incredibly evocative about what it means to grieve as a woman, as a Black woman who's just lost her mother in a community and in an environment outside of that community which has been incredibly hostile.
Yes.
And that has led to significant failings in the criminal justice system, as well as contribute to the very, events that happened around Stephen Lawrence's life and death. To the point where Feely presents, this crying figure, this bold figure, incredibly composed, and each tear is an image of Stephen Lawrence, and a web of kind of like dotted imagery behind her figure, as a kind of representation of the, I don't know, for me it's the web of lies which has led to this very image. I'm not sure that he meant to present it like that, but that's how I perceived it.
But that's what's interesting about it. So, sorry to interrupt you. When I had a look at it, my first emotion, I think, came as a mother.
Right.
I saw the picture first, and when I realized who it was, all of a sudden, I felt a rush of emotion. And then when looking at closely at detail, that the pictures and the tears were her son, and then the stories that that connect with that, it hits you on so many levels.
Absolutely.
And then when we talk about, ethnicity, culture, Black history, we forget to see us as a whole picture, as a whole story, and the intersectionalities that go into that.
Absolutely.
So yes, it's by a Black artist. Yes, it's about a Black woman, but it's about a mother and the relationship with her child. And you talk about empathy and being able to connect on that level alone is so powerful.
No, absolutely. And I think that's, I think you raised a really important point, which is where does the story become something about race? When is it racialized, and when is it humanized? In this, the emotions that we all share, it goes back to who's the knower, who can know something, and where can't you know that? So for as you say, as a mum that might be something that you would feel if that happened to you. But the intersectional element is that there's a particular set of circumstances that have come about as a result of that art being made because of the events that occurred. And that's really, it's important for us to try to, as educators, to recognize where the stories come together.
Yes.
But where the stories also need to be read as separate narratives, and that's something that we try to do. And you can't be sure that you've got it right all the time. And I think that unsureness is really important as well. That we're always tentative about certain elements of what it means to learn like this. And I mean, just our conversation right now, moment of learning for both of us. I would say, certainly for me. And we need to find ways of incorporating this kind of teaching, this kind of conversation into our educational experience. Because you're talking about that being holistic as well. We often ignore the emotional element of the learning, and that's really important, that we might try to teach things where there's an emotional response from the learner, and we ignore that sometimes. You know, and as a philosopher of education, or as an outdoor educator as well, we might be quite insensitive sometimes because of the examples we use, because they're purposefully provocative. And we do it in drama as well, right? You use a really provocative image, just like Ophelie's No Woman, No Cry, to get a response. But we sometimes don't always think about the emotional engagement and interaction. And another piece of artwork that has really stood out to me is Billy Zengewa's The Rebirth of Black Venus. And what's really interesting about her is that prior to this work, she had done a lot of work which was through what she called like the male gaze. So there's a lot of work in art about the gaze and attention. And she said a lot of her work was through the male gaze and sometimes through the white gaze. It's a bit like Adichie's the problem of a single story, and reading.
I was going to refer to that. Yes.
Yeah. So, but it's kind of like the artistic side of that, the other art side of that. And so she was kind of fed up. She's like, I'm fed up of creating artworks which aren't from my standpoint, from my position. And so she creates this really big tapestry of this really, you know, again, a strong female figure, black female form, standing above Johannesburg cityscape. And you just see this body just being so elegant and being so vibrant, but done in such a considered way. It's done differently from, let's say, like the white forms of Venus that you see from like the Renaissance and all that kind of stuff, where they're, you know, their hands are out like this and they're like,
that's doing image,
you know, all that. But hers isn't so much. Hers isn't like that. It's much more, look at me. It's provocative in a kind of, here I am, as a kind of, as a note of attention to people who aren't used to that, going, I think it's a very clever image where there's this female form, this black female form, where it just stands so self-assured. And you think, you know, that's really interesting in the way that it underplays the image as well as puts the image in front of you. It reminds me once that I used I think there was a few years ago, Beyonce did the Super Bowl as dressed as the Black Panther. This is one of the Black Panthers. Do you remember this? And really kind of provocative imagery, for which, you know, I'm going to say something really controversial here, which was lost on quite a lot of, I imagine, the white population in the United States and of course the United Kingdom, but not everybody. And we used it in a philosophy session, and the students like, you know, what is she getting at? Why did she do it? I was like, well, the fact that you're asking the question is probably more than enough of your answer, really. And that's what stands out to me when we think about what's our role as educators throughout the year, and not just in Black History Month, because, you know, Black History Month is also contentious as well, in the sense that it's a month amongst 12.
Conversation.
But I think it's important for us to make sure that we celebrate this time as well in our teaching, and that we use it to really get people to ask the questions around, say, the Ophelie imagery or the Zengewa imagery, or, you know, something like Adichie's A Single Story, or even Beyonce. As long as we start having the conversations, we're on our way, I think.
I agree.
Silence, there's this way of thinking about silence in philosophy, particularly when there's debates. There's this notion of silence is assent. So if you stay silent, you just assent to whatever the group, the dominant group, go with. And we've got to really question the silence around some of these things. And so if people are asking questions and discussing this, then we're on our way. May not always be right, but we're on our way, I think.
That point you just made has been a big conversation within the whole Black Lives Matter movement that erupted here in across the world. But in UK, it was for me significant because I don't think we'd seen in my lifetime, hadn't seen much like that. And there's a whole conversation about, but it's America, it's not like that here. We don't have the same problems here. And, as a Black woman, as a mother, as a teacher, I know that's absolutely not true.
Right.
In the classroom, when I've gone to teaching in Hertfordshire, and I've gone to a school that is predominantly white, and there's a few Black students there, and the stare they give to me, or the way they gravitate to me, and I was not expecting it at all. I trained and taught in London. It was, very normal. But coming here, I've seen a very different side to my role as an educator.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting that when you talk about those kind of, sorry about that, when we talk about microaggressions, in critical race theory, which of course at the moment is in America is being demonized by the political elite, but I think for anybody who feels it, like yourself, and somebody who can be attuned to it and observe it, I think it's really real. I think you can't deny the small aggressions that you might feel as, say, as a Black parent in a predominantly white school in a leafy part of of Hertfordshire. I think that's a really important thing that I think as educators we also have to be really aware of. I remember when I was teaching the module back in the summer, and I was a head teacher, again in the kind of leafy area. One Black student, came to her and said, I don't belong here. I don't belong here. You didn't listen to me in school council, and I had something to say. And that stood with her, and because she realized that she may not have had these thoughts consciously. She's not consciously being racist or being aggressive, but it's there in the moments, in the small interactions. So we have a good job of work to change the narratives that we live by, I think, and to jar people's their lived experience, to keep plugging away at it. There's a notion in philosophy called disrupting your ontology, so disrupting your view of reality. So if we can find ways of disrupting by artworks or by stories or by discussions like this, we can start to change people's way of seeing the world. We can change what it means to be a knower and a learner.
Wow, that's really powerful. Thank you so much, Lewis. That's been brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.